For over a century, Johnny Walker has shared its bold spirit with the game of golf. Now, crafted with Devereaux Golf, Johnny Walker introduces the Johnny Walker Blue Label-inspired Sunday Golf Bag, elevating the game with sleek design, Blue Label hues, and refined gold accents. Celebrate your hole-in-one with a premium Sunday bag crafted by Devereaux Golf. Submit proof of your achievement to johnnywalker.com/blue-in-1. Please drink responsibly.
Listen, life's all about leveling up. Whether you're handling business on the field or kicking it in your zone, you like to celebrate with cigars that match the moment. That's why you should link up with Famous Cigars to bring you a wild deal. Right now, you can grab 8 premium cigars for just $8. You heard that right. 8 top-rated cigars at $1 a stick. Top quality brands like Oliva, Romeo y Julieta, and Davidoff. Handpicked just for you and worth over $80. Hit up famouscigars.com/cam and lock in this exclusive deal. While you're there, check out their insane selection of premium cigars, all shipped fresh and fast from their massive 20,000 square foot humidor. That's half a football field. Famous Cigars has been in the game since 1939 and still family owned. So celebrate every win with the folks at Famous. 8 cigars for $8. famouscigars.com/cam.
What's up, y'all? It's Drewski, and I've teamed up with Mountain Dew to produce a hilarious new basketball podcast called The Dew Zone with Drewski. Learn the backstories of your favorite ballers and celebrities like Jamal Murray.
Did you have like a favorite team? Was it the Raptors at the time or no? Was the Raptors even started around that time?
Come on, bro. I ain't that old, fam. You talking like I'm 50.
Taylor Rooks, Asia Wilson, and many more. You won't want to miss this. Listen to The Dew Zone with Drewski on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast.
Booker with another beautiful feed to the slashing Bridges. Delicious dive for the second time around.
Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Sam. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. It's a different experience watching the Phoenix Suns in games this week against teams like Utah and the Clippers, right? Versus the 30-point blowout we saw yesterday against Washington.
Yeah, there was something satisfying about the win against Washington in that the Suns had been playing down to their opponents commonly. Washington actually hasn't been terrible like a lot of the teams that they've struggled with, like the Timberwolves. But still, a team that the Suns should easily beat. So it was nice to see them. I think they ended up outscoring the Wizards by 26 points in the second half when it was a 2-point game at halftime. So that game really flipped in the second half. So it's nice to see them sort of turn it on and look like a team that should be beating those teams in those types of ways. But you're right. I mean, we talked about what to talk about on this podcast, you and I. And it's like we really have to focus on the games that were the back-to-back games on national TV, the overtime win against the Jazz, and then the back-to-back game against the Clippers that resulted in a loss, which a lot of people watched. It wasn't just us. It seemed like that was sort of the talk of the NBA, the Jazz game especially. The Clippers game less so, probably because the Suns were so exhausted.
There were a couple other really good games on that night, too, I remember. The Jazz game, we kind of lucked into like a time slot where it's like the entire league was really watching. My Twitter engagement that night was crazy compared to a normal night.
Well, I want to ask you just from this perspective, did you have fun watching these games?
Of course. I feel like actually I saw you, and I don't think we've spoken about it privately, say that like during the Jazz game when it was going to overtime, I wish I could enjoy this. This is a crazy game but like I thought it was a great game. I was stressed out. I'll concede that to you. I was definitely stressed out. And I think it's going to be even more stressful in the playoffs because like especially then you're on the biggest stage, everyone's watching, like the Suns are they're representing themselves, but they're also kind of representing us as fans in like a weird way. Like you want to go to bat for them, you want to defend them. And so if they're having a bad night, you don't want to see them take shots from all sides in the online discourse. But like that game against Utah was just a phenomenal game for any neutral fan who like wanted to tune in. Like that to me was a tremendous product for the NBA to put on display and to market and advertise. And like, I don't know. I mean, as someone who watches a lot of basketball and likes a lot of basketball, I watched a game like that and I was like, wow, this should really be promoted by the NBA. Like, you know, we and should stand as proof that we don't need an LA team in the Western Conference Finals. We don't need it to be the Lakers versus Brooklyn in the finals to keep people interested in good basketball. Now, of course, I'm not naive. I know that's what Adam Silver still wants. I know that's the type of series that would still make more money. And frankly, if it ends up being Utah versus Phoenix in the Western Conference Finals, Adam Silver's probably going to shit his pants. But I thought it was really fun. And honestly, I think anyone who actually likes basketball and like just really enjoys watching it and isn't so focused on the WWE type narratives of like, oh, I only want to watch basketball because I'm 14 years old and I want to comment on Instagram about LaFraud and like losing rings and shit like that. Like people who are not those people would enjoy a series like that. They would get a lot out of it and it would be a good time.
It was an objectively fun game if we're talking about the Jazz game alone. It was just fun. I mean, it was back and forth. It was two teams that were playing their best basketball at that time. The Suns going into it with a 6-game win streak and then finishing it with a 7-game win streak, ultimately winning that game. And then the Jazz, of course, the best record in the league, and they're just constantly on a winning streak because that's what happens when you have the best record in the league. That's what it takes. So they're really, really, really good teams playing some really, really good basketball. And I'll be honest, I think that the build-up, sort of the lead into the game, was less fun than once the game started. It was just basketball again, and it was really fun. And I had these sort of flashbacks of watching the Suns versus the Lakers in 2010 or before that, 2006, watching the Suns and the Spurs and in TNT games or ESPN games in the past, and just sort of flashbacks. So yeah, I remember what it was like to be watching a regular season game specifically that mattered this much, in the way that if the Suns lost, it really wouldn't have mattered too much. But I think there's like an element of, what can we learn from this? Of course, this is what you and I are going to talk about with the rest of this episode, along with the Clippers game, but less so because of the back-to-back. That just, it gave me a nice sort of nostalgic feeling of, I had these flashbacks of Steve Nash in my mind, and like the analysts that we were hearing talk about this, whether it be Charles Barkley or the guys that call the games for ESPN. I had flashbacks of that, and it was kind of fun. I did enjoy it. The basketball itself was fascinating too. These are two teams with the Jazz that are really good, and I think they did some interesting things. I think the Clippers game weirdly felt almost more like a playoff game, in that like the teams were both trying really interesting stuff in the Clippers game. The Jazz game as well. Just the Clippers, something about the Clippers game felt more like a chess match to me. Am I wrong in that feeling? Did you feel that at all?
Well, it was physical, first of all, and that might have been part of what gave you that impression, right? Like anytime someone gets ejected.
Right. Multiple players.
Multiple players in that case, that's going to be part of what goes into it.
Yeah, so that could have been part of it, and it was a fascinating game. I do have one stat. We're going to get what we're going to get into here. Both Sam and I pulled some things that we learned from these games, and we're just going to go back and forth and have conversations about some things that both of us thought were interesting.
I want to quickly point out, that is the general premise of the episode. One of the things I'm going to talk about is relevant to the Wizards game too. So
yeah,
I think Suns fans are experiencing something new now that we haven't experienced in a while, which is you're a guaranteed playoff team. You get to this part of the season where there's only 20 games left, and you start to think, like, what's the point? It's like,
right.
Like even I had the thought, should I even tune into this Wizards game? Of course I did, and I still enjoyed it. It was a great game, and part of that is because I know I have to talk about it every week, but it's kind of just like, you want every game to project something. You want it to tell you something about projecting your value towards the playoffs. And sometimes when you're playing these teams like the Wizards and the Suns upcoming, they have games against like the Heat and the Spurs, and just not every single one of these opponents, it may feel like, takes on the utmost importance. That's a pretty new thing, I think, for Suns fans, where we're kind of just like, we get to this point in the season and it's not about player development. It's not about, we know we're going to go in and we're going to lose every game, but give me Dragan and Josh Jackson off the bench, so for 35 minutes, so I can just like pray for development. It's actually about, well, we know that these games, not every single one carries the same amount of importance, but you're still vying for some level of playoff seeding, and you still want to, you want to finish off strong in any way you can. It does bring up a quick conversation that maybe we could have about, do you think there's going to be any type of load management, in the ensuing weeks for this team? It's not really something we've thought about.
I'd be surprised. The schedule gets a little tough, especially with Eastern Conference teams coming up here. So I'd be surprised if that were to happen. But also, Chris Paul seems to pride himself on playing every game that he possibly can. At least after he left Houston, he was very proud of that in OKC. I think he only missed 2 games, including one of them was like for a funeral or something that was like personal reasons. So I'd be surprised if that were to happen. It's weirdly, I almost feel like Mikal Bridges is one of the only guys that might need a game or two off. He had that heel problem, and it clearly affected his play for multiple games in a row. You can't bench him. Like, I don't think you can. He's played every game since middle school, and I think that's the actual stat.
It is the actual stat. Yeah, that would be a tragedy if Mikal missed a game.
I personally don't care, but it obviously clearly means something to him. But I doubt it would happen. So it would surprise me a lot. I think the Lakers are actually doing okay, better than I thought they would do as far as like winning games. The defense seems to have held up relatively well. Drummond is playing all right, so the Lakers aren't really dropping in the standings as fast as they could be. If they did drop in a way where they could be a 2-7 matchup, if the Suns stay in the second, then you can maybe consider some chicanery to try and drop or try and avoid that matchup. But I don't think that the Suns are going to do that in any way. I think they're going to try and play the best possible basketball at all times, because that's what Chris Paul teams do. That's just what they do.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think there's an upcoming stretch starting next week where you just play contender after contender after contender. That's going to be such a critical portion of the schedule for Suns fans, and we're going to be talking about every game in great detail. So you can't afford to load manage anyone for that, but there are a few other games, like as we get to the very end of the schedule, I don't think anyone would blame, like Chris Paul. You need him for the playoffs. I wouldn't blame him if you benched him for a game or two. I don't think he's going to do it. I also don't think it would be a bad idea to do it, though.
Yeah.
But we'll cross that bridge eventually.
Yeah. I have one surprise stat to throw at you that we haven't talked about before we get into the things that we learned from this last week. And it is that in the last 5 games, small sample size theater here, the Suns are 11th in pace. 11th in pace. The top half of the league. And in the last 5 games, they passed 100.7 for the first time of any stretch of the season. They were at over 100 in pace. Can you believe that? First of all, does that surprise you, and can you believe it?
Well, it does, because I don't feel like I've seen an unusual amount of transition offense out of the Suns this week. First of all, this should tell you something about how fried my brain is at this point in the year. Like, before Utah, LA, and Washington, what are even the other 2 games in there? I can't remember anymore.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Who did we play last Monday? I couldn't tell you anymore. We played Houston, maybe? Was that recent?
That seems right.
Maybe. Look. Like, so, I don't know. It kind of depends on opponent. But I will tell you, 11th in pace.
Houston and Miami.
That's Houston and Miami.
Is that right? No. Yeah, OKC, Houston, Utah, LA Clippers, and Washington were those 5.
OKC and Houston.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so that's 2 bad teams.
Yeah, but I think that the Suns were pushing the pace. Washington, I think, was obvious, but in the Clippers and Utah games as well, specifically Devin Booker, I thought. And actually, if you look at the pace if you sort by February 1st, by the way, a lot of the stats that I look at, I now start at February 1st because I think the Suns had a learning period at the beginning of the season and things started to click on February 1st. And if you sort all stats, I'm going to call that like the beginning of this real season for the Suns at this point. If you sort by that, then you can see like a different team. And I think those stats are the ones that matter the most when you're thinking about the postseason. If you sort by February 1st, the Suns actually jump up to 21st in pace in that time, which is obviously not very fast. But the Suns were 29th in pace on the entire season as recently as a few weeks ago. So to jump up to 21st in pace in that time means that they're speeding up lately. And I think that has something to do with Devin Booker scoring a little bit more recently. And I think, actually, if you sort by pace on the individual players, Dario Saric and Cameron Payne are at the top. Obviously,
okay.
Chris Paul's still in the top 5 or 6, though. Like, Chris Paul still is pushing the ball a little bit, but I do think that the bench makes a little bit more of a concerted effort to do it.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that is natural, like just naturally conducive to the way that Cameron Payne plays, or if it's like a specific coaching thing where Monty kind of takes Cam aside and Dario and whoever and says, this is the way we want you to play when Chris Paul's not in the game. It's kind of something that I don't think we've ever gotten a clear-cut answer out of Monty about.
Yeah, Monty actually has talked about that the Suns need to speed up the pace. He did probably a few months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, he made a point of talking about that after a game that they did lose. So I think it's not by accident. I think it is a little bit by design. Now, does that mean that Chris Paul's going to stop having whoever's taking the ball out bowl it down the court so that Chris Paul can take as long as possible to pick it up and have as much time possible on the shot clock? No, he's going to continue to do that. But on live ball turnovers and on rebounds, I think the Suns are more likely to push the ball than they were previous in the season, and I think that's a good thing, especially if the ball is in Devin Booker or Mikal Bridges' hands, who have been phenomenal in transition so far this season. In fact, Mikal Bridges is, I think, on the Suns, the best around the rim of anyone on the Suns so far. So, pretty crazy stat. I just came across that when I was doing some research, and I thought we had to talk about that before we get into anything else. I hope they continue to do that. I think that it's a good way to get easy points, and I'm not sure if it'll work in the playoffs. Transition defense gets better in the playoffs when teams are more aware of it. You can't catch teams off guard as much. But I do hope they continue to do that.
Yeah, well, we saw some really fancy passes from Devin Booker to Mikal Bridges last night. Yeah, that was like envisioning that in the playoffs would be fun. Those guys are just Taylor. You know, Chris Paul in the equation. It's nice when he pushes a little bit, but you kind of know you're not going to get too much of that out of him. But just Booker and Bridges is a match made in heaven for transition offense. So hopefully the Suns look to exploit it as much as possible.
Yeah, somebody said something on that highlight that if this team starts to have fun, you better watch out. And I thought that was a really interesting observation because they're so deadly serious with Chris Paul and Devin Booker. Those guys never really seem like they're having fun while playing the game of basketball. Devin Booker, I think in a lot of ways, has not been allowed to have fun in his NBA career, in that because the Suns have lost so much that if he showed any sign that he was enjoying himself on the court, people were going to roast him online unfairly, especially for a player that has accomplished the things that he accomplished at a young age individually. The teams were always bad, and that was not necessarily his fault. But people still make fun of him for enjoying the fact that he scored 70 points in an NBA game at 20 years old. Still, right now, currently, the record of points in a game for any active NBA player. So to see him smile after that play, for those who missed it, he threw an insane pass to Mikal Bridges, and he smiled when somebody said, wow, if this team starts to have fun, you better watch out. I just thought that was a great observation because they don't. And if they start to control the game in a way that allows them to make it fun, the way like the Warriors did when the Warriors were at their peak, then that's pretty fun.
They're kind of the new Spurs in a way.
Right?
Like, doesn't it kind of feel like that? The system is pretty similar, and they're just a bunch of fundamentally sound robots who, like, don't crank out a lot of highlight plays. That's sort of the way this team operates.
Yeah,
They've got a long way to go. They need to win a few titles and kind of string a dynasty together before you can really compare them to the Spurs. But I kind of get a similar vibe out of what this team is, and hopefully that's not too offensive to anyone who has repressed memories of the 2000 Spurs or whatever. But you should take that as a compliment because that's one of the greatest dynasties this sport has ever seen.
Yeah, who wouldn't want to do that? I mean, sustained excellence over 20 years. Let's get into the things that we learned from this week. I'll start. I have a few. You have a few. The thing I want to start with is DeAndre Ayton, because DeAndre Ayton has been really, really, really good lately, and I think some games very loudly very good, and some games kind of quietly good. And even when he's quietly good, it can result in 18 points and 11 rebounds. He had multiple games where he had more than 5 offensive rebounds in a row. he had 2 games in a row where he had like 11 offensive rebounds combined in this, and I think that was the Jazz and the Clippers games. And when you look at those games, those offensive rebounds were vital to the success of the team in those specific games. And I think when you specifically look at his importance in these games, when you're playing teams like the Jazz and the Clippers, you're playing teams that play a playoff style of defense. They understand that they have a bunch of smart and capable and versatile defenders, and that means that they're pretty confident switching in a lot of cases. When teams switch, offensive rebounds become really important because the Suns will often attack switches with guards. If you're attacking a switch with a guard, that means that if the shot misses, DeAndre Ayton's likely going to be under the rim with a guy that's much smaller than him. What's important for DeAndre Ayton in those scenarios is to roll hard to the basket and to establish position for rebounding before the shot goes up. And if you watch clips of him in these games, he was doing exactly that. Now, that does not always lead to an offensive rebound. Often, it's a lot of effort that's maybe considered wasted. But when you do it consistently, play after play after play, that's how you end up with 7 offensive rebounds in a game like he did in this last week. And I was really impressed with that specific thing. Offensively, I think he's done a good job in general, but I think finding himself in the right places under the rim, specifically against good teams who will consistently switch on the Suns, has been really important. I've been impressed with him. I have some more things I want to talk about, but I want to get your thoughts on him. What have you thought about DeAndre Ayton, specifically in those 2 games against the Clippers and Jazz?
He was great. In this whole week, I brought up the stats. He averaged 19 points, 11 rebounds, 2 blocks on 70% shooting from the field. Right there, that's a fantastic stat line. But as we've talked about with DA in the past, it's not necessarily about the stats. I think rebounding is one of those stats that's very important. You can track, especially in the playoffs. I think you were touching on this just a minute ago. As teams place more of an importance on transition defense, it's typically the guards and the wings who are going to drop back and force most of that transition defense, right? So it almost puts a greater importance on actually your bigs to fight for offensive positioning. And if anyone's going to get those offensive rebounds, it's going to be your big man. So I like seeing Ayton there to vie for those rebounds. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if he's averaging 19 and 11. It doesn't matter if he's averaging, he doesn't need to get 30 points and 20 rebounds. He can still have a very big impact on the game just by bringing that consistent energy every night. And, I think in that, I wish I could remember, I think it was the Jazz game, he created like close to double-digit points, close to 10 points just through his offensive rebounding. Mm-hmm. It's just like, you can't see a clear impact on the game than through plays like that. Yeah. Very critical clutch plays that ran through DeAndre Ayton. Now, granted, I think there were other times that were interesting during these 2 games where he wasn't even on the floor for certain possessions in the late fourth quarter when you really needed to defend a team in a specific way, and they decided to go small ball. And that's a very interesting thing we can talk about. But Ayton took every minute that he was given. He was ran to like high 30s, maybe even 40 plus minutes in one of those 2 games. I think again in the Jazz game, which is something he's rarely done in his career, maybe only 2 or 3 times, and he responded to it with an energy level that I think we haven't always seen from him this season. So I was really happy with just his effort. I'm
glad you brought up the minutes, and I think the Jazz game was, as far as chess matches go, Saric was getting killed. We're going to talk about Saric more in a minute, but Saric was getting killed by Gobert, which is a terrible matchup for him. Gobert is massive, and Saric is an undersized center, which can work in a lot of matchups, but doesn't really work in that scenario. I mean, he's a backup center playing against a starter. That's not going to work. I mean, there's a reason that Saric works, and there's a reason that DeAndre Ayton works, and that's the type of matchup where DeAndre Ayton is even more necessary than even just any regular average game. So that means that he was matching a lot of minutes with Gobert, and that means he plays a lot of minutes in the game. But specifically getting in the right position offensively when you're not getting the ball, because he's not necessarily going to get the ball, takes a ton of effort. And when you're playing a lot of minutes, that means you have to do it over and over and over again, even when you're not going to get the rebound or you're not going to get the pass. And Chris Paul has commonly talked about it with DeAndre Ayton. You just have to push through being tired. A lot of cases with DeAndre Ayton, the reason that sometimes he's not in position for offensive rebounds is because he's tired, I think. And when you have games like this, and I've brought up this potential possibility with DeAndre Ayton where maybe he will be the best version of himself in the playoffs because he understands the moment and he's going to push through being tired, just like he did in the Utah game, just like he did in the Clippers game. Even in a loss, I think he did really well in that game, for the record. And that's what's going to put him in position to succeed. What he has gotten good at, and I think credit to Devin Booker on this as well, is what has become known as the Kobe assist. And for those who don't know what this is, it is when a guard, like Devin Booker, attacks the basket so hard that the big has to help on the guard, and he just throws it up at the basket. Now, whether or not that goes in or they call a foul matters less, because when a big is out on Devin Booker to contest, if we have a big that's in the right position and rolled hard to begin with, they're perfectly in position for that offensive rebound putback. That's called a Kobe assist. Get the rebound is what Kobe would say as far as passing the ball. And that's what Shaq did. Shaq had a lot of those. And I think both of them have gotten good at it, because sometimes it's hard to get that pass off to DeAndre Ayton in scenarios. And it's better to just get the shot up at the rim when you're in that position and trust that DeAndre Ayton can get the rebound. And in these games he did. I still believe DeAndre Ayton could lead the NBA in offensive rebounding. He's pretty high up there in offensive rebound, but he could lead the NBA in offensive rebounding if he specifically wanted to. Now, this is not necessarily a coaching thing. I don't think it is. It takes a ton of effort to do it, and whether or not he does it in a regular game matters a lot less to me than if he's going to do it in the playoffs, and at this point I'm starting to believe that he will. One more stat to throw at you, and I want to get your thoughts on this too.
Sure.
Since February 1st, the season started, right? That's where I'm going to say the season really started with the Sun.
Okay.
DeAndre Ayton has... There's one stat. You talked about the stats don't really matter. The one stat that mattered to me with DeAndre Ayton throughout the season is, were the Suns better with him on the floor? And for the beginning of the season, where I think he was struggling, pushing through being tired and struggling with effort consistently in a ways that made him look like a rookie in a lot of those games, that bothered me, because the Suns were worse with him on the floor. And when you miss a rotation as a center, the entire defense collapses. Since February 1st, Ayton is number 1 on the Suns in net rating. Number 1 on the Suns in net rating. Did you know that, first of all?
I don't want to say that I knew that. I didn't know that he was number 1, but it's related to the segment that I have planned next. So I knew part of it. And
I'll set you up for that, because he's at 12.7, but Saric, he finally passed Saric. Saric is still actually pretty high in net rating for the Suns at an insane 11.8. But 12.7 for DeAndre Ayton is insanely high. Not only is it the best at the Suns, in that time frame since February 1st, it's one of the top in the league. And just like Saric is actually still one of the top in the league. This is a weird stat, and I think this is related to his struggles lately. Out of the starting 5, Mikal Bridges is actually the lowest in net rating in that specific stat, where he was the best on the team for 2 years in that time frame. That means that even Jay Crowder has passed him. Devin Booker and Chris Paul also have passed him. So kind of a weird stat for Mikal Bridges that will probably fix as he gets healthy. But any other thoughts on DeAndre Ayton, then you can feel free to go to yours.
Not really. I kind of want to challenge you about something. It's not even a challenge, because I agree with you, but yeah. I want to give you the opportunity to get the record straight on something. So I think it was last week we talked about rebounding as one of those stats that doesn't really matter. Yeah. And then this week we're talking about how much we like offensive rebounding.
Absolutely.
I want to give you the floor to talk about the nuance there, because I think some people might miss that.
I think
or misconstrue it.
Yeah,
rightfully so.
And fair, but I think for the record, we weren't talking about DeAndre Ayton when I said that previously. What is the best way to view rebounding, and there has been specific statistical studies by Cleaning the Glass in 538 that I was referencing, and I should have brought up those articles. I can try to find links for them later, about rebounding, in that rebounding itself, by itself, is not a good statistic to determine whether or not a player is going to be impactful while they're on the floor. For example,
just to give people an example, Russell Westbrook or Luka Doncic getting 10 rebounds in a game, where 9 of those 10 are uncontested defensive rebounds, where like a big lets them have it, are the types of rebounds that are not, it doesn't really lead to winning in any sense.
Yeah, I also think Andre Drummond, if he's paid $25 million a year because he makes because he gets 13 to 15 rebounds every single game, you're making a massive mistake. He has to do more than that in order to be impactful on the floor. Getting rebounds because you're tall is something that most tall players can do. So you never want to use rebounding as an individual statistic to determine whether or not a player is good, because then you can easily think that Andre Drummond is better than DeAndre Ayton, for example, which he very much is not. Just because he's capable of getting more rebounds does not mean he's a more impactful player. There's so much more around basketball that matters in order for that to be an impactful stat. So that's basically where I fall on that. I mean, obviously, rebounds and the context of the individual rebounds matter the most. And I think you using Russell Westbrook and Luka Doncic actually is a really great example.
Yeah, I mean, not every rebound is created equally. I think almost always offensive rebounds are more valuable than defensive rebounds, but it's also about the scheme of the team, how that team plays transition defense, how many bodies are packed around you that you're actually fighting with to get the board in the first place. Some rebounds are, I don't know, it's just one of a million ways where, like, I understand why we keep the same old simple box score in basketball that we've had for decades now, but some stats in basketball just don't do a great job of actually telling you all that much about the game.
Somebody has to get a rebound, right? When a shot goes up, somebody has to get a rebound. So that by itself minimizes the ability to use that stat to determine who's the best basketball player on your team. So
the economy is made up of real people doing real stuff, and it affects everything, which you obviously know since you're a real person doing real stuff. Marketplace is here to help you get smart about everything beyond the what of the day's business and economic news. We dig into the how and the why with the real people driving our economy. From big tech and interest rates to small businesses and what's happening at the Fed, Marketplace breaks it all down so you don't have to. Listen to Marketplace wherever you get your podcasts.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in the new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series premiering Sunday, June 6th, only on Showtime.
Let's talk about a guy who doesn't get rebounds.
yeah.
You like that segue?
Yeah, it's very good. I mean, he's okay at it.
He's okay at it. Let's talk about Dario Saric. So the contrast, right? We were talking about the net ratings. Here's the stat that I have. When we say that Ayton has been really good with his net ratings and his impact on the Suns, since the All-Star break, no, it's not February 1st, it's not when the season started, but the filter I applied is at the All-Star break. The Suns are a plus 12.5 with DeAndre Ayton at center. They are a plus 1.2 with Dario Saric at center, which is almost completely flipping what we saw for the first 2 months of the season. The first 2 months of the season, we routinely saw, despite all the evidence of our eyes telling us that Booker and Paul and Ayton, and Bridges even these are the most talented players on the Suns. They're the best players. The starting lineup had these negative net ratings, and it would be Cam Payne and Dario Saric would check in, Cam Johnson too, would check in for 15 or 20 minutes a game. They would have a plus 10 or a plus 15, and they would routinely save the Suns starting lineup from being pretty mediocre. And that was the way things used to go at the beginning of the year. Since the All-Star break, it's been completely flipped. Cam Payne, as well as Dario Saric, a lot of times these guys kind of look mediocre, and they're not bad. I would definitely say that Dario has had his moments. In fact, I think a lot of times online he's taking too much heat. I think he does still have some really decent games. But mostly the scouting report is out on him. People know what he's going to do on offense. They know that he has to rely on his intelligence and that he really just doesn't have the athleticism to play like a normal NBA center. And so as a result, we're seeing a lot more instances where the Suns are basically just treading water with Saric. And that's the best you can hope for. And so where do we go from here is we can talk about whether we think Dario gets it back. We can talk about whether there are alternative options for other guys you could play in the playoffs in certain situations. What we can't do is what we were doing a couple weeks ago and hope that you can go out and get another big who comes in and saves you. Because actually a critical deadline passed this week, and the deadline for basically playoff rosters have to be set now. and the Suns did not add another player. They did not claim any players on off of waivers. For instance, Kem Birch, who I talked about at the trade deadline, is going to Toronto. That's a player that the Suns maybe could have tried to claim off waivers if they had somehow convinced him this week, but the deadline passed. They can no longer do that. And so your roster is set. Dario Saric is your backup center, and there can't be any more fantasies about let's go out and get a different guy to help us play physical. You have to work with what you have. So how can we do that?
Yeah, it's tough. Obviously, we didn't expect him to remain a plus 20
no,
season. And even
and I even said that, back when we released that video 3 months ago about how good Dario's been. I said, he's a plus 20. He's not going to be a plus 20 all year.
Yeah.
But I think it's more so just about when the three-point shot isn't falling, when the pump fake isn't fooling anybody. Obviously, this guy isn't bringing too much value. Also, a lot of it, the defensive stats have regressed.
That's
hard,
what I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
As we expected. So I'll give the floor to you there.
Yeah, well, what I think, I'll just cover a little bit first about just my general impression of it. It's weird when he checks in the game, he immediately plays like he's been playing 20 minutes already. He looks exhausted. He's a little bit slower than he was to start the season, and his decisions are taking a split second longer. And for a player that relies on their brain over their body, the decision making has to be very quick in order for it to work. And if it's a little bit slow, that's how he throws passes out of bounds instead of to cutters, or that's how he pump fakes and then goes directly into the block instead of actually getting the guy on that pump fake. And those types of decisions matter a lot for him. I want to just preface all of what I'm saying with, I think that there is an element of he needs to just play through this. There were times that other players struggled throughout the season. DeAndre Ayton struggled early. Devin Booker struggled early. Even Chris Paul struggled at the beginning of the season, where Dario was playing well throughout that time. So for him to struggle now, the Suns continue to win. Now, if he starts losing games for the Suns, maybe you start experimenting with Frank Kaminsky, weirdly, and seeing how that works, especially as he's shooting still over 40%, assuming he's healthy. And try it that way. But what concerns me more than that is, and I talked about this online as well, is it seems like teams are finding ways to specifically target Dario Saric on switches. The Suns switch almost everything with Dario Saric on the floor, and he's very, very good at reading switches in that he can switch onto a guy pretty quickly, but his foot speed is slow. He's not the fastest guy, and he's not capable of keeping up with guards. What I do like that he does is he plays up on guards enough that he's able to force them to drive, where you might have time for help defense if you're forcing them to drive in those scenarios, and you're avoiding the three-point shot, which is good for a lot of players that the Suns could wind up against in the playoffs. But the fact that oftentimes, like against the Clippers, he was lined up guarding Kawhi Leonard, or he's lined up guarding Donovan Mitchell on the Jazz, that's not ideal for the Suns. So if he continues to struggle with just being a step slower than I think he was at the beginning of the season, which could be even maybe he's sore, maybe he rolled an ankle at practice and they're not telling us about it. Maybe there's something there that we're not fully aware of. But if he continues to do that, I think the Suns have to figure out a way to maybe move him into more of a traditional drop coverage for a while to see how that would work. And I don't think they want to do that. But it's just, how can you continue to do that when he's matched up against the best offensive players and it's just not working very well? That's what concerns me.
Yeah, all around the league, we see that this is the downside of switching, is it makes your scheme easy, but it makes it very easy for the offense to pinpoint a mismatch because they know they can get any mismatch they want on the one weakest link, whoever that is that you're throwing out there. In this case, it's Dario Saric. So, yeah, I think he has to play through it. And I think he will. And, like even last night, granted it was only the Wizards, but he played well. He's had good games recently where he's played well. I think a lot of it just comes back to that slow-footedness on defense and also struggling with the fact that the scouting report is out on him on offense and he just can't get any easy offense anymore the way he used to.
Yeah. A lot of it is if it just starts making more threes, it opens everything up a little bit because it opens the drive up, it opens little extra passes on those drives, like everything will get a little bit better. Anything else in that one?
Yeah, he's never been like the greatest shooter, right?
No.
That's kind of the problem. I'm just looking here. Yeah, he's shooting 32% from deep since the All-Star break.
Yeah.
So obviously you hope that can get better, but just kind of the way that Dario operates, like he's a 36% shooter naturally. That's what he is for his career. So hoping that he becomes your 40% sharpshooter, your Ryan Anderson, Mirza Teletovic, whoever else you can think of historically that would kind of fit that archetype. He's not one of those, so it's tough.
Yeah. You look at the stats and you look at how he was playing, and then you look at like 4 games in a row where he didn't make a single three. It's hard to not wonder if there's something going on that's not been told, that we haven't really heard about. That's all I'll say. I don't know exactly what that would be, but it's just statistically, guys don't just drop off that dramatically so quickly unless something happened. But I don't know. I guess we won't know. All right, I'll move on unless you have anything else there.
No, go for it.
Okay, so I think that the Clippers are going to be an insanely tough matchup for the Suns if they match up in the playoffs. Now, the Suns have done a good job winning important important season series for the playoffs. Now, the Jazz was probably the most important one, assuming the Suns can actually end up with the number 1 seed if the Jazz and the Suns tie. The Jazz don't appear to be slowing down, but that team has also been insanely healthy. If one of those guys drops off on that team, you could see the Suns potentially catching up, like if Donovan Mitchell misses 5 or 6 games or something like that. Maybe they'll be better without him. But they did lose.
Couldn't resist the shot there.
Yeah. He's 9th in his own team in true shooting percentage. I brought that up online too. With the Clippers, the Suns have now lost the season series against the Clippers. Now, one of the early games I think matters a little bit less, and I think there's another caveat added on to...
It matters less because it wasn't before February 1st.
It was before the season started, yeah.
Yeah, it was before February 1st, of course.
Exactly.
We all know that was preseason.
Yeah, it was preseason. That was before the season started. So, with this recent game, obviously there's a caveat on second night of a back-to-back after an overtime game. It wasn't even a regular game. It was a game where Chris Paul played like 46 minutes or something insane like that. But just looking at that team, with Kawhi and Paul George, yes, the Suns have 2 guys to match up with those guys, but one of the advantage of having 2 guys is that you have 2 smart defenders that can now play help defense. I think you take away their ability to play help defense when both Mikal and Jay are now guarding one of those 2 guys. Now, we played them without Serge Ibaka, too. They get even better with Serge Ibaka. With 2 big wings, it makes it pretty difficult to switch. With the Suns have remained very good at switching, and their switching defense has been good. With a guy like Kawhi Leonard, he wants that. Like, the Suns had to play a style of defense that was avoiding the switch at a certain point in this game when Torrey Craig was matched up on Kawhi Leonard, and Rondo kept screening for Kawhi, specifically to try to get Campaign to switch onto Kawhi. The Suns were hard hedging. This is something the Suns rarely do, where Campaign would just run out at Kawhi and then sprint back to Rondo as quickly as possible to give Craig enough time to get around the screen and stay on Kawhi. That's a sign that the Suns' regular defensive scheme does not work against this team, especially when they have the ability to go extra small. Now, without Serge Ibaka, maybe they won't do that once they have him. But what they did in this game is they had a series basically with Marcus Morris at center. Now, that's tough because it specifically tries to target DeAndre Ayton with really fast, big, and strong wings, and also guys who can shoot threes. And Ayton, for as good as he is, has to play a step back in order to maximize his effectiveness on defense, which means that guys will feel confident shooting that three-pointer over them. And even Rondo. Like, I know that people like to clown on Rondo. And he hit that 3 in Chris Paul's face that essentially sealed the game at some point. But Rondo shot 40% from 3 in the playoffs last year. Like, this is a different Rondo. Yes, in the regular season, he's going to shoot badly.
And he shoots 100% when playing Chris Paul.
Exactly.
Fueled by pure hatred.
Exactly.
Of that
so
man.
I look at this team, and I think the Suns have some interesting things that they can and will probably try if they get matched up with the Clippers. But I look at this team, and I look at Denver, and I think those 2 teams, outside of the Lakers if they're fully healthy, which is a mismatch for everyone, I look at those 2 teams, and I think if we meet up against any of those 2 teams, or either of those 2 teams in the second round, that's tough, man. That's really, really tough.
Yeah, and we knew all of these teams were going to be tough, but I do think the Clippers have become underrated somehow. First of all, Paul George, just phenomenal shot making the entire game. The Clippers don't win if they're not able to shoot 49% from deep while the Suns shoot 25%. So there is an element of luck in the NBA these days. As teams shoot more and more three-pointers, variance plays a huge role in each individual game. So sometimes we look for little things of maybe I could have done this, maybe this team could have done that. But a lot of times it comes down to three-point luck. That being said, the Clippers have like 40% three-point shooters, and Paul George is having the best shooting season of his career, and he's always been a good shooter, at least for like the past 5 or 6 years. So tip your cap to him. Going back to what you were talking about, the Suns really like to switch these days, and switching doesn't work on the Clippers. So maybe you would think, well, why can't they try running a drop? For instance, against Utah, the Suns ran a drop, and basically they know that Utah is not a very good mid-range team. So they had Ayton play back, and they wanted to bet on either we're going to force Conley and Mitchell to beat us in the mid-range where we know they're not super comfortable, or we're going to allow them to take these pull-up threes, which is what happens when you run a drop coverage. Teams can walk into pull-up threes, but we'd rather have them take these slightly tougher off-the-dribble threes as opposed to, say, letting Rudy Gobert have whatever he wants at the rim every play, or letting Joe Ingles shoot like wide open corner threes, right? Like, it was better than those alternatives. Well, against the Clippers, that doesn't work either. Like, that allowed the Suns to win the game against Utah, but it doesn't work against the Clippers because, again, you've got these two big wings who are just like Kawhi feasts in the mid-range, and you've got all these three-point shooters who can walk into pull-up threes. They've got a really dynamic offense in a way where, yes, like a lot of it was just three-point variance as to the reason the Suns lost. And I honestly don't think the Suns really did anything wrong in that game. It's just you look forward to what it would be like if you played this team in a full series. They're just good at everything. And I don't think there's an easy way to answer the question, how do you guard the Clippers?
Yeah, there were times like with the Lakers run last season where Dwight Howard just doesn't play a series, or JaVale McGee just doesn't play a series, or like maybe they play the first game and then slowly they get phased out. I think that's the type of thing that could happen with Dario Saric against the Clippers. With as valuable as Dario can be in some scenarios, the Clippers' ability to attack you in so many different ways means that the Suns might be forced to go small without DeAndre Ayton on the floor against them, because they have just so many ways to attack you that you need as much versatility as possible defensively. And if you don't have that defensive versatility the way DeAndre Ayton does and Dario Saric does not, then maybe that's why you got Torrey Craig. Right now you can have, instead of Dario coming off the bench first, you have Torrey come in, and the Suns play super small, which could force them, by the way, people are going to hate to hear this, into more isolation possessions on offense. But that they will have to get better at that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that with my last point here. But I just look at the Clippers and I think, I hope that the Clippers and the Nuggets somehow play earlier before the Suns do. So at the very least, the path does not have both of them.
I think you've got a chance against the Nuggets. I mean, they're going to be hard too. I'm still holding on to that Lakers-Clippers first-round series. Have one of them knock the other out.
That would be great as well. So we're gonna come back to obviously matchups in the playoffs as this season goes along. But what's your next thing, Sam?
My next one, I'm gonna keep bringing up some of these same contenders that we've been talking about this season because I actually want to have a conversation, and this is more related to the Wizards game. Free throws. The Suns shot 7 free throws last night, which is just like ridiculous. Like I actually looked it up, Mike. How many points did the Suns have last night? Was it like 134?
Yeah, something like that.
I think it was 134. I'd have to double check.
They scored 77 points in the second half.
In all of NBA history, the most points in any NBA game where a team shot only 7 free throws or less in the game was 134 points that the Suns got last night. I think they were tied with one other team that had gotten it before, but it was just a weird game. You're not supposed to score that many points when you shoot that few free throws. And I think it's interesting because routinely, and you're going to hear these conversations come up again, if you listen to national pods, if you listen to what national analysts are saying about the Suns, they're going to, if they haven't necessarily seen a lot of the team, they're going to take a glance down the stat sheet and they're going to say, what can I pick at here? And the stat that keeps getting picked at, the Suns are 29th in free throw attempts per game. And people are going to look at that and they're going to say, well, that's definitely going to stop them in the playoffs because it means you're not being aggressive and looking for contact. You're not getting easy points. You're leaving points on the table. I feel like we haven't had a conversation about how we feel about this in quite a long time. So I want to turn it back on you. How do you feel about the Suns being 29th and in free throws per game? Do you think it impacts their ability to win a championship this year?
So I've looked at this. I wish I would have had my research on this before, but I've looked at this just in the past, and I've looked at teams that have won the championship, and I looked at their free throw rates over the course of the season, and there's one team that stands out as a team that was very good at winning championships and winning games without taking a lot of free throw attempts. Can you guess what team that is?
Is it the Spurs?
It's the Warriors.
It's shooting.
I think
the team that's good at shooting.
There's a trade-off. Exactly. There's a trade-off between free throws and shooting threes, because if you shoot a lot of threes, you tend to not get into the paint. You tend to not drive a lot more. And I think driving on guys is the easiest way to draw free throws. So to me, there's the obvious trade-off between free throws and three-point shooters. I would prefer the Suns to have more three-point shooters, and I would prioritize three-point shooters over free throws, specifically because of Devin Booker and Devin Booker's ability to drive with the right amount of space. It's difficult to hold him one-on-one when he has that full energy bar, if you will. He can get by anyone, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second here, because it's all about whether or not he does. The spacing matters. In fact, some of our friends with NBA Math posted a statistic about spacing around superstars. And
that was B-Ball Index, I think.
Yeah, B-Ball Index. Yes, exactly. Krishna, I believe is his name. I'll tweet it out tomorrow again. But the stat was about the amount of spacing around superstars in the league. Kawhi Leonard was number 1 with the Spurs. The Spurs basically have the best spacing around Kawhi Leonard. Number 2, though, was Devin Booker. And that spacing matters a lot. So to me, if you're looking at it as a trade-off between free throw shooting and three-point shooting, I think that being on the side of three-point shooting in that specific debate is the right way to go, but it's not necessarily a trade-off between those two things. The Warriors were the obvious standout there, so I think the Suns can find ways to get more free throws. I don't think you can put that entirely on Devin Booker. I think he does a lot of that already, and he finds ways to do that. DeAndre Ayton needed to get better and got better. He still needs to get better because
he's still a very contact averse big.
Yes, and his speed,
and Chris Paul.
Yes. Yeah. Chris Paul's pretty contact averse as well. That's actually
and Campaign. I was just gonna say, like all of these guys are. Campaign likes going in there and throwing up these little dainty floaters. It's just kind of how all of them operate if they actually try to shove their body in a little bit. But I have another point I want to bring up, which is I think there are 8 contenders this year. There's 5 contenders that we routinely talk about in the West. The Suns are one of them, and then you toss in Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and Philly in the East. Gives you 8. The Suns are 29th in free throw attempts per game. Denver is 28th. The Clippers are 27th. The Bucks are also in the bottom 10. And then, some of these teams are very good. Philly draws more free throws than any other team in the NBA because they have Joel Embiid. But so going back to what the national analysts are talking about and some of this criticism, I do think there's an element of, well, you need to make up your mind. Are you discounting all of Phoenix, Denver, the Clippers, and Milwaukee because all of them don't get free throws, or are you just kind of looking for something to nitpick Phoenix about?
Yeah, I think there's an easy thing with DeAndre. If you look at DeAndre Ayton, you can make that for people sort of outside of us, like this Suns world that we live in. There's an easy person to point at with DeAndre Ayton, and I think you can point your ire at him and say, why doesn't he get more free throws? I think if you watch the Suns enough, you understand his role. And the fact that he's not really attacking from a position to get free throws in most cases means that he's not going to get a lot of them. When he catches the ball 15 feet away, I would prefer that he takes one dribble and tries to get that foul or tries to get to the rim in order to get free throws more than I would prefer a fadeaway jump shot in a lot of cases. But I think even those have been cut down by a significant amount. So it's hard to really get mad at that. So I think there's a way to look at it. Is it a problem with the construction, or is it a problem with the way the players are playing? I think it's more of a problem with how the team is constructed more than I think it's a problem with the way the players are playing. I do not think that they need to drive into the lane recklessly to try to draw fouls. I do not think they need to play in a way that causes them to bait fouls, because in the playoffs, refs call less of those calls.
Thank you.
They do
That's
not
a really good
want
point.
to be embarrassed by players baiting them into blowing the whistle on the biggest stage. They would prefer to let players play more than they would prefer to call cheap fouls. And so when you look at it, you could say maybe James Jones made a mistake. I don't think so. I prefer the shooting. I don't want them to play recklessly. So I'm fine with how they do it.
I think that's a great point. And I think people are so quick to point out 3-point variance as like, oh, you live or die by the 3. Not enough people talk about these teams that live or die by the whistle, because it's the same concept. It's just the most frustrating thing about NBA officiating, I think, isn't necessarily like that the league has gone soft or anything. It's the inconsistency that drives people nuts. It's the fact that you're supposed to have these standards, but then one ref is going to call the game completely differently than another ref. And I have the perfect stat to display that. The Sixers, who I mentioned, Joel Embiid is an MVP candidate. I don't think he should win, but he's in the conversation, and here's a reason why he's in the conversation. When the Sixers play without Joel Embiid this year in a handful of games, they're like a 500, slightly under 500 team. When the Sixers play with Joel Embiid and he shoots less than 10 free throws, you by some miracle hold that 300-pound man to less than 10 free throws. The Sixers are still 10-5. Good. They're still a good team. They're one of the best teams in the East, but beatable. And they've lost some games in those types of games where officials are willing to swallow their whistle. They've lost some games against teams that they are objectively better than. Now, let's go to the games when Embiid gets the amount of free throws that he normally gets, over 10 a game. The Sixers are 17-2 in those games. They turn from a team that is beatable, has a couple of weaknesses that are exploitable, to a team that's basically unstoppable. And so this is, as much as we talk about these teams that live or die by the 3, you look at the other end of the spectrum, the Sixers live or die by the whistle. And so what happens if they go up against a ref that particularly doesn't like Joel Embiid or doesn't like the franchise or whatever, just decides that they want to call a game where they just let guys go at each other's throats for 48 minutes and he or she is not going to call anything? Well, the Sixers suddenly have a much greater chance of losing that game because Joel Embiid isn't going to get his usual easy free 10 points that he gets. So I think it's important to make that point that you made and say that, you know, there's two sides to it.
Yeah. There's a famous compilation that Houston Rockets fans love to retweet and put online of James Harden getting fouled in the playoffs over and over and over again without the whistle. And here's the truth about that compilation. He's getting fouled. He is actually getting fouled in that compilation. But the refs do not call it because of his history of baiting them into calling fouls that maybe are not in the spirit of basketball. I think a lot of James Harden, when he baits fouls, are actual fouls. They just don't, it's not really in the spirit of the game. So what happens if you play too recklessly, if you rely on it too much, you end up with a compilation like that. There's not a lot you can do. And ultimately, here's the truth about it. If you're getting fouled on a shot, you're shooting a contested shot. I would prefer the Suns to work a little bit harder to get uncontested shots with the shooters that they have on the roster.
Right. At least if you chuck 43s and you miss it, maybe it's just a bad shooting night, but at least you died by your own hands. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's another variable.
There's an element of I did that to myself. Whereas if you recklessly throw yourself at the rim and you're just praying for a whistle and you don't get it, there's another variable. Exactly. There's another variable added with the referees that you have to rely on, that you have to beg for, essentially, the right calls. And yeah. I'm happy personally to be a team that's not in that position. Like, I look at those other teams down with us at the bottom, Milwaukee, Denver, the Clippers. I think any of those teams, just like us, could win a championship this year, and none of them gets to the free throw line. So what's the difference? Yeah,
the truth is Devin Booker could shoot more free throws if he acted more in the regular season, but it's not a good habit. It's just not a good habit to create before the end of the season and the postseason begins, and they stop calling that. All right. That was a good one. I'm glad you brought that one up. Last one for me, unless you have anything else on that.
Nope.
Okay.
Let's wrap it up here.
Yeah. My last one is that the Suns are terrified of teams trapping Devin Booker. And I used the word terrified. Maybe it's more accurate to say a little bit scared of. But in the Utah game, the Suns had a chance to win it in regulation. They passed the ball in and immediately saw that Donovan Mitchell was on Devin Booker. Now, that is a good matchup for Devin Booker. He should have been able to at least get to mid-range. I think Rudy Gobert, for as much as people like to clown on him, just forces guys to make decisions that they would not normally make because of his length and size. And I think Devin Booker shooting that really long 2-foot over the line was more of a result of Rudy Gobert than it was Donovan Mitchell. Just Devin Booker can't get his own shot on Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell's too small. But what happened in that scenario is once he caught the ball at the top of the key, Donovan Mitchell was on him. The Suns players that were on the court immediately fled to the corners of the court and got as far away from Devin Booker as possible in order to avoid the trap. What could have happened, say anyone went to screen for Devin Booker, is that they would have sent 2 guys at Devin Booker, forced him to get the ball out of his hands. Now, all of a sudden, somebody else is making a decision with 2 or 3 seconds left on the clock. That's the reason the Suns did not have a screen at that moment of the clock. I noticed that play when it happened, and it's a little bit frustrating. I think Devin Booker could have done better in his execution, but I understand exactly why the Suns did not run a specific play with a screen. When there's 9 seconds left and you have a screen, a trap can ruin everything, especially when you don't have a lot of it. For some reason, NBA teams don't trap a lot against the Suns. Mike Prada, former guest of the podcast, and I believe
friend of the pod,
we would
say, of course,
and possibly one of the smartest basketball minds in the media. Now, I almost want to say in the world, but I don't know. There's some really smart guys actually working for teams. But I think he's one of the smartest guys. I know he watches the Suns. He tweeted this. I'm going to read these tweets to you. I know you missed them, Sam. So he said, Clippers dabbled with hard traps on Devin Booker last night, both in pick and rolls and late clock ISOs. Phoenix should expect to see more of those in the playoffs. They have decent shooters, but opponents may dare them to show it in a high pressure situation and or run them off the line. The Suns have a couple solutions to that coverage. One, more Chris Paul, who's harder to trap because he changes speeds and angles so well before the screen is set. 2, more decoy motion into Booker ball screens using the threat of their backdoor cutting skills to deter ball denials. And then he says, still, this gets at my biggest concern with the Suns in the playoffs. They're light on scoring options. Their offensive numbers are good in the regular season, but I wonder what happens when a team can lock in and to cut their timing, play alignment, and secondary transition scoring. So Mike Prada, and obviously somebody that I very much respect, smart. I actually disagreed with some of this from Mike Prada, I'll be honest. But here's the thing. He's smarter than me, and he is scared of this specific thing happening for the Suns. I have some thoughts on this, but I want to get what you think on this, Sam. What do you think about teams starting to potentially do what Devin Booker calls junk defenses, which is trapping, and that's 2 guys going at the ball?
I think it's a good bet for any team that wants to try it, because I think Mike has a lot of good points in that the Suns are now, I think, roughly a top 10 3-point shooting team, but they have a lot of unproven shooters. Is Jay Crowder really a 38% 3-point shooter? Is Mikal Bridges really a 41% 3-point shooter? I'm not 100% sure. If you gave each of those guys, if you just left them in a gym and had them shoot 2,000 threes, would they shoot that percentage in the long term? Who knows? So there's definitely an element of you want to make the other guys prove it. Now, how can the Suns respond? I think Mike brings up some really good points there. We've talked in the past about, with regard to some of that decoy motion that he mentions, you specifically, like Cam Johnson, ghost screening and then, or flare screening and then running off towards kind of a motion 3. He's one of your better motion shooters, so he's definitely kind of a guy you might want to put into a prove it scenario. Mikal Bridges is one of the best cutters in the NBA, so any way you can find a way for him to kind of leverage his balance his shooting gravity and his cutting gravity and make plays within that framework is also a really good idea for the Suns. However, I guess I would push back a little bit on the notion that, like, I think this is the best way to guard the Suns. I still think probably the best way to guard the Suns is just switch everything and kind of switch everything, let it bog down into ISO offense that frustrates the Suns fan base so much, as we know. I think the Suns are not the best shooting team in the NBA. maybe this is going to be something that they run into if they get into the deeper later rounds of the playoffs, like the Western Conference Finals or the Finals. We'll notice and we'll talk about this sort of thing if teams are consistently trapping Devin Booker. But otherwise, I think their shooters are good enough, like especially in the first round or maybe even the second round of the playoffs. I think you could trap Devin Booker all game long, and occasionally you're going to run into games like against the Clippers where the Suns shot 25% from deep. If Jay Crowder shoots 2 for 8, Cam Johnson shoots 1 for 9, Mikal Bridges shoots 1 for 7. If all those things land right for you in the same game and you trap Devin Booker, then you will win that game. If you force the ball into DeAndre Ayton's hands at right around the free throw line area and he's not comfortable making those passes to other guys, you will win that game. But as a sustainable strategy that you could run against the Suns over an entire series, I think they'll make enough shots that you just can't do that. You could play Devin Booker like that a year or two ago, and you would have had a great amount of success with it. That's how most teams played him at the time. But these days, I think for the most part, it's credit to James Jones over anyone else. The roster assembled has enough around Booker where you can't just trap him all the time and expect to win games.
Yeah. The number one thing there, Chris Paul. If you're secondary playmaker, which in these scenarios, he would be the secondary playmaker, is Chris Paul. You can do some good things with that. The issue is, one, you don't know when traps are coming, right? Teams are not going to trap on every single play, and if they do, you can see it coming. The only team in the history of basketball that has been forced to be guarded by traps on every single possession is the Warriors' death lineup pre-Kevin Durant, where Steph Curry could kill anyone that goes under a screen. And they would trap every single time. Draymond Green would catch it in space, and they would get a lob dunk or a three-pointer on every single play. Now, the Suns don't really have a guy like that, but they do have Mikal Bridges. Now, here's the thing. If Mikal Bridges is screening, they probably won't trap. If it's DeAndre Ayton, they might, because they want to force the ball into DeAndre Ayton's hands in space and then attack him if he tries to dribble with people swiping at the ball as much as possible. So this is where it can become a little bit scary, because I think the best case scenario is, well, then if they're trapping every possession, then Chris Paul screens, Mikal Bridges screens, then you can do something with that. Or even Cam Johnson. I think you can do some decoy screens with Cam and get him open threes. But if they're only trapping with DeAndre Ayton screens, what they're trying to do in that case is get DeAndre Ayton off the court, which is tough for the Suns, as we've talked about.
Which you could do. You could bring Dario into the game, but then Dario needs to hold up his end of the bargain and play well on defense and rebound, and that's not always a guarantee.
Yes. So I think it's interesting, and the teams have not thrown this junk defense at the Suns very often. So it's clear that the Suns were scared of it in that scenario in the end of the game, and that was the right choice. You want the ball in Devin Booker's hands if he has the right matchup. It's up to Devin Booker to get past Donovan Mitchell and not be too afraid. I think what's tough is he rarely gets calls in those end-of-game scenarios. He didn't want it to rely on whether or not he gets called for Rudy Gobert tackling him. So fair, we'll see how that goes. This is something to keep an eye on more than anything else, because as the Suns get closer and closer to the playoffs, these specific ideas are going to be tested against them, and the Suns need to have a counter. And I think they have the roster versatility, thanks to James Jones, to actually have specific counters on this. A fascinating week for the Suns, playing against two contenders in the West. Some fascinating weeks coming up for the Suns. Do you have anything else to add here, Sam, before we get going?
Just, keep your spirits high as we go into this next week. This is kind of the calm before the storm. I'm looking ahead at the schedule now. You've got the Rockets, the Heat, the Kings, and Spurs. So these games are not completely devoid of meaning. We will still be watching and enjoying them and taking the wins while they last, at least. And of course, we'll be back next week to analyze some of those games as well. But all the while knowing that there's the gauntlet coming up when you play like 6 or 7 contenders starting next week. Exactly. That's coming up. It's going to be a major challenge for the Suns, and ultimately it's going to define, I think, how a lot of people view the Suns into the playoffs, if they actually view them as pretenders or legitimate contenders. So enjoy these games while they last. They may not mean as much, but still fun basketball.
Yep, that's right. And thank you, everyone, once again for listening. If you'd like to give us a review on your podcast app, feel free to do that. But we will be back next week for sure.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in the new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series premiering Sunday, June 6th, only on Showtime.
This episode is brought to you by Ro. Confidence is everything. Women can sense it, and trust me, they love it. But if you're in your head worried about performance, that swag, unfortunately, gentlemen, is gone. Rose Sparks keeps you ready. When the moment hits, you can step up like a superhero and handle your business. No doubt, just confidence.
Fellas, Rose Sparks gets you ready fast, dissolving under your tongue and working in 15 minutes on average. No waiting, no missing the moment, plus it stays active up to 36 hours.
So when the mood hits, you can go back to back to back, round after round after round. Ro connects guys with medical provider 100% online, so there's no awkward conversation with in-person providers. Go to ro.com/sparks to see if you qualify. If prescribed, new sexual health patients gets $15 off Sparks on reoccurring plan. Connect with the provider at ro.co/fourth to find out if prescriptions Ro Sparks are right for you. That's ro.co/fourth for $15 off your first order. If approved, treatment ships directly to their door. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and or manufacturing review. For full safety information, go to ro.co/safety info.